Too fast. All right, the programs that we use, the Drought Monitor as triggers, is the Livestock Forage Disaster Program, the Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish Program. We also use it for Fast Track Secretarial Disaster Declarations. We use it for Conservation Reserve Program, Emergency Hay and Grazing, and we also use it for the Emergency Conservation Program for severe drought, designation, and implementation requests. Those are several areas that we use the U.S. Drought Monitor for triggers. The first one that we'll talk about is the LFP program. Just to give you a brief description of what we do with the LFP program, the Livestock Forage Disaster Program. It provides compensation to livestock producers who suffer grazing losses on permanent, native, improved pastures, and those pastures that are planted specifically for grazing that suffer a loss due to drought conditions during the normal grazing period in the county. It also provides compensation to eligible producers due to wildfires or fires in the county where the producer's permitted livestock are reduced by a federal agency due to the fire. And these grazing losses must have occurred after September 30 of 2011. And this is as of the 2014 Farm Bill. Prior to the new Farm Bill, the 2008 Farm Bill, the program was not permanent. It's permanent now. So we have a permanent program in place. We use the Drought Monitor to classify the severity of the drought, do the exceptional drought to determine if eligible livestock producers can receive LFP payments for these grazing losses for a specific grazing type. And we look at the different grazing types to determine whether or not they meet the certain criteria. And we'll talk about that criteria. For example, a producer, if they have a grazing loss on a specific forage type, it's in the D2, severe drought intensity in any area of the county for at least 8 consecutive weeks during the normal grazing period, they get a 1-month payment. If a producer has a grazing loss on a specific type of forage, when the county has a D3 rating, extreme drought, that producer would receive up to 3 monthly payments. If the producer has a grazing loss on land that's rated as a D3 extreme drought in any area of the county for at least 4 weeks, and it doesn't have to be consecutive weeks, or a D4 exceptional drought in any area of the county at any time, that producer would receive 4 monthly payments under the LFP program. And the last criteria for grazing loss is if there is a D4 exceptional drought, that producer suffers a grazing loss for 4 weeks, not consecutive weeks, for that specific type of forage, they could receive 5 monthly payments. Okay, the way that we determine the monthly payment rate, it's the lesser of 60% of the livestock producers' covered feed, 60% lesser of the monthly feed cost for all the livestock, which is really the livestock's feed needs, or it's calculated using the normal carrying capacity of the eligible grazing livestock producer. And if we pay on the covered feed cost, that means that the livestock producer is not overgrazing. We're actually covering on feed needs. If we're covering on carrying capacity, then the producer is overgrazing and we're covering on carrying capacity. That's what we're doing. The lesser of, 60% or lesser. We just, Ryan came up, and he's the one that develops our, if you got questions on how we develop our feed costs.
Don't blame me.
Don't blame him. He just follows what the statute says, but he develops those for us. We got those coming out in an amendment, but the monthly feed cost for a 30-day period on an adult beef cow is $28.07. So we would take 60% of that for all covered livestock for an adult beef cow, compare that to the carrying capacity feed cost, and we pay 60% lesser of $28.07. Last year it was $30. So the corn price has gone down, so in essence that feed cost goes down. We publish weekly maps that can be found at this website. And you can go to the FSA website under disaster programs. You can click on look at our weekly maps. I have an example of the next page that you get to. We have the different crops that are eligible for LFP, annual ryegrass, cool season improved, and so forth. You can click on whichever one you want to see what states and counties are eligible and what disaster levels, payment month levels. Here's an example of one that was updated on March 22nd for short season small grains, and as you can see here, we had 1, 3, and 4 month payment levels here in the Panhandle of Texas. So pretty severe drought. The ELAP. I don't administer this program. When it first came out, I did, but somebody else does it, and thank goodness I don't have to now. But the ELAP does provide emergency assistance to producers of livestock, honeybees, and farm-raised fish. They have loss because of disease, adverse weather, other conditions, including loss because of blizzards, wildfires, as determined by the Secretary. Really, one of the reasons that we had the ELAP program was to take care of losses that the Livestock Indemnity Program, or LFP, wouldn't take care of. And at one time, just a side note, there was only $20 million for it. With this new omnibus budget, I think they did away with the pay limit for ELAP. So that's just a side note.
Okay, question?
Yes. Want me to go back?
No, I just had a quick question. LFP is tied to the Farm Bill, is that correct? It's part of the Farm Bill, and ELAP is not?
No, ELAP is as well. ELAP, LIP, and LFP are all three tied to the Farm Bill. They're all permanent programs.
I just was told something different, so I wanted to okay.
Yeah.
Or I misunderstood.
Yes, sir. They're all permanent programs. For ELAP Trigger, if there's a D3 extreme drought intensity rating by the U.S. Drought Monitor, at any time during the program year, they use that for additional honeybee feed loss. And they also use it when there's a D3 extreme drought intensity that directly impacts water availability at any time during the normal grazing period. For example, snowpack that feeds streams and springs, as determined by the deputy administrator or his designee or her designee, for losses resulting from transporting water to livestock. So those are triggers there for ELAP. Okay, the fast track secretarial disaster declarations. This was an expedited process that came as a result of the Farm Bill, or not as a Farm Bill, I guess, but as just another way that we could get secretarial drought designations out to states in a faster process than what we used to. It's based on drought intensity data from the U.S. Drought Monitor. Qualifying. Yes.
The USDA just issued a drought area designation, 60 counties in Texas.
Yes.
And some in Oklahoma that are adjacent. Our county sits right in the middle of all this, and we're not in it.
I can't answer that. They're processing them, and they're doing them on a weekly basis. Which county?
Wheeler.
Wheeler? Okay.
Yeah. Far eastern side of the Panhandle, third from the top. 2 counties in Oklahoma that abut us are in it. And all the counties around us are also.
Let me look. I've got an email. They just announced some more today.
Okay.
And I'll look at it here in just a minute when I'm done. Because I know they did some more today here in Texas, and I just saw those this morning.
Okay.
And we'll look, but if not, I'll check.
And then we can look at our table data that Brian was just in, and he's got it right there as his first bullet. If that Wheeler County, it was in D2 for 8 consecutive weeks. And if that, if the data table shows that, that should get in their system to trigger it.
And it will be, and it may be one of those that, there was 2 different listings. One listed like 2 or 3 counties, and the next one listed several counties, so I'll take a look and see.
Okay.
If not, I'll check with those ones.
And actually it was, and I don't know if it was on the designation that came out this morning, but even if Wheeler was not, I live in Wheeler County also, we've met before at the office there. Even if we were not, for whatever reason, designated as a primary, we would at least be contiguous and eligible for the farm loan benefit.
But they listed the adjacent, and we weren't in that.
We probably should have been, and we may be this morning, I got it too, but my phone's dying, so I'll look. But either way, we would still be eligible just based on the contiguous designation. Contiguous, excuse me.
But But the criteria is that you had to have 8 weeks of continuous severe drought at a D2, extreme drought D3, or an exceptional drought D4 for any length of time to qualify for the fast track. These are determined on the earliest and latest established beginning and ending dates for forage in the county, taking all graze forage into consideration, and covers losses because of drought. They used to have some other things that they covered, but they're taking that out with an amendment. It's not published yet, so that's why I didn't cover those in here, if some of you are asking. Okay, after a county receives a designation for drought through the fast track process, they may be requested again after 8 months have passed since the fast track designation was approved. And if producers of spring planted crops are unable to apply for an emergency loan because the 8-month loan application period is expired. For all other natural disasters that do not include fast track triggers, the county has to have a 30% production loss, at least one crop, or a determination has to be made by surveying producers that other lending institutions will not be able to provide emergency financing to get a secretarial disaster declaration. The fast track and regular secretarial disaster designations, they trigger the availability of FSA emergency loans, and they may be used for eligibility for future ad hoc disaster assistance programs. And there's some of those being announced, I think, as we speak. There's also maps of secretarial disaster designations for drought, and they're in a PDF format. They can be found at this website, the FSA page. And this is a copy of the Secretarial Disaster Declaration Triggers. And this is a map that shows primary counties. And in red, Wheeler ought to be there because they've already shown them on the map, so I'm not sure why.
So I'm going to move through the CRP program, talk a little bit about the ECP program. I guess I'm going to ask, Scotty's very, very knowledgeable. I should mention there are other people. Jobin Williams works on CRP, is not here. He's the manager of that program, and is not here to answer questions. So I'll do my best to get through it, but maybe I'll ask hold questions. I'll get through the two programs, and then we can kind of open it up and crowdsource some of the other expert opinions and wisdom that's in the room today. And then I should also say, I'm glad to be here, particularly because you wouldn't know it, but I'm from San Antonio, went to Texas State University, I got to drop my Texas cred. But Texas being such a massive state, I never had the opportunity to get out, and I always wish that I'd taken advantage when I was here. So beautiful to see Amarillo. Wish it wasn't quite so windy out yesterday, but nevertheless, glad to be here. So the Conservation Reserve Program, really important one here in Texas in particular. Has some provisions that cover emergency haying and grazing requests. CRP was created back in 1985 in a Farm Bill program. It's a program that exists to create contracts with agricultural producers in exchange for the producers promise to implement practices that produce public benefits, particularly on environmentally sensitive land. So CRP establishes these contracts, typically 10 and 15 years long, to implement practices. Many of them are for planting grasses or forbs or trees and managing that cover to control soil erosion, improve water quality, and then particularly important here in Texas in this region, develop wildlife habitat. So FSA would, in exchange for those practices, provide rental payments and cost share assistance to the producers. So the FSA county committees can request access to these lands for haying and grazing purposes on an emergency basis for the entire county. The designation be made. And the Drought Monitor provides a really valuable tool in this instance because it allows us to see what the incidence or the severity is. So with a D2 severe drought designation in any part of that county, they would basically be triggered or authorized to make the request. That said, there are a lot of reasons or things that, other triggers that would need to be evaluated before a request could be approved. Namely, given the importance of nesting habitat. Texas obviously has a lot of pasture year-round. However, one significant constraint is that from March 1st through June 1st is the approved nesting season, so no grazing would be permitted during that time. And then an additional month until July 1st for haying. The difference in those grazing versus haying period is just that with haying, getting the thresher in there, you're causing more disruption, so there's some additional concern or an additional period given there before allowing someone to go and begin haying. But the drought monitor, I think, clearly is really valuable there, given all of the complexity and all the evaluation, in order to ensure that we're still getting those public benefits from the environmentally sensitive practices, that there is a emergency situation that warrants looking at this application. So the best source in the handbook into CRP would direct people to use the website. So Brian walked through basically checking at a local level what the current status is. So that would be submitted in a request. This is from, I guess, the most recent or current. We've seen some maps today. So the state committees would be able to grant a designation for emergency grazing up to 90 calendar days. You'll see in all of the grazing designations, there's an additional cap that it can't exceed September 30th. So despite the availability of good pasture, there are two significant constraints in this region or in many regions between the nesting season running through much of the greening and then additionally September 30th being a hard deadline for grazing. And then a 30 calendar day extension could be granted for emergency grazing. Still should not exceed September 30th. I think for grazing, the requirement is that you have all livestock off that pasture within 1 day after the 30th. Additionally, emergency haying could be authorized for up to 60 calendar days, but not to exceed August 31st with no extensions. In that instance, I think there was a 15-day window that allowed you to get all of the hay off of the land. So COCs can request emergency haying and grazing with state concurrence through the national office if evidence supports the county experiencing 40% or greater loss in normal hay and pasture production and drought conditions. Precipitation levels indicate an average of 40% or greater loss of normal precipitation for the 4 most recent months, plus the days in the current month before the date of the request. This is to say, I guess really to hit home on the value of the drought monitor designation. This is an enormous burden to put on someone at the local level or a producer to provide all of this evidence at the local level of what kind of burden they're experiencing as a result of the drought. So the drought monitor designation provides a really concise and pithy way of saying that a lot of these boxes are checked. If this is a significant drought situation that could not have been foreseen, or as we were looking at incorporating the data and the history, something that is going to certainly disrupt the production cycle. So I'll pivot now to the Emergency Conservation Program. A little more straightforward, but the Emergency Conservation Program provides emergency funding and technical assistance to farmers and ranchers. Aims at rehabilitating farmland that was damaged in a natural disaster. And specifically in the case of drought, there are provisions again that implement emergency water conservation or provide water in the event of a persistent drought. And this operates when severe drought conditions exist and water sources are currently being used for livestock or orchards, vineyard irrigation, but have been reduced as the result of an ongoing drought. And it's made clear that this is intended for extreme situations when survival or the viability of a farm operation is called into question as a result of the severity of the drought. So the requirement for ECP implementation or the drought trigger would, again, you see the levels indicate an average of 40% or greater loss of normal participation for the 4 most recent months plus the days in the current months before the request. that language shows up again, and it could be significant. You know, if you're experiencing a significant drought and you begin the process of submitting all of this paperwork, and then you get some rain. And I can imagine, in addition to the heartbreak of experiencing a really difficult drought, it must be very frustrating when there's that lag. So again, I think the Drought Monitor provides this improvement, and it's a very timely and accurate measure of the impact of drought. So it really expedites this process. And then there's a note here, because various regions of the country are so different, there's a additional recognition of the fact that snowpack could be an important factor in looking at the severity of drought in a specific area. So all this is simplified now with the triggering of the ECP emergency water provision in cases when there's a D3 extreme drought. And that again would probably most easily be accessed by visiting the website and looking at for your county or for your region if there's any current D3 status or has been any current D3 status at some point. So with that, that's CRP and ECP. I'll make sure Scotty hasn't left me up here for the firing squad, and then we can open up for questions. And if we don't have a good answer for you, I'm sure we'll be able to get in touch with someone or even kind of put it back.